I asked the question, how does the blood return to the heart, since we don't have a little heart in our toes that could pump the blood back. So there are different mechanisms. It's not a pumping. All the pressure from the heart is almost down to nothing in the capillary beds. And that has a reason, because we need it to go real slow there in the capillary bed so that the exchange can take place. So there are several mechanisms. One is that our veins are embedded in skeletal muscles, and when these skeletal muscles contract, they squeeze the venous blood upwards, and you have valves here that allow blood to go up but not flow back. And here we are talking about your calf, for example. Of course, in the head, it is the opposite. So that is one point, skeletal muscles. The next point is gravity, and that relates to what happens above the heart. Gravity helps bring it back to the heart from the head. And then some of the larger veins also have smooth muscles around them. And the last thing here is the respiratory pump. That is usually the hardest to explain. Your chest cavity has a little bit less of atmospheric pressure. So your chest cavity, your lung, has less pressure than the atmosphere. So there's a pressure gradient that facilitates the movement of blood back through the chest cavity to the heart against the gravity. Increased respiratory activity, as well as the effect of the skeletal muscles pump and venous vasoconstriction, all enhance venous return during exercise. Yeah, so again, when you exercise, you have skeletal muscles, you have the gravity, you have the smooth muscles that work, and because you are breathing in deeper, that pressure difference between the atmosphere and your chest cavity becomes larger, and it's like a suction that sucks the blood up. So they're not in the same chamber, your chest cavity and the blood, but it doesn't matter because you still have an area of low pressure, and the higher pressure blood is drawn there to create equilibrium. And one more thing to add to my mentioning older people and longer flights. So especially from the legs, where it's a long way up to the heart, this venous return really relies on the skeletal muscles. And if you don't use those, then the veins become flaccid and a lot of water pools and eventually leaks out into the tissue. So that's why on longer flight, even if you're younger, you should do these exercises for your legs and move your legs around so that you don't get thrombosis or this pooling of fluids in your feet and legs. So look at these. Which of the following does not contribute to enhanced venous return during exercise? So more muscle squeezing, yes, that helps. More venous vasodilation, well, that's the wrong one, because if you dilate your veins, it will be harder to return the venous blood to the heart. Deeper respiration helps because it engages your respiratory pump. And more venous return will lead to what? Again, I'll give you a moment here. So if you said all of the above in the previous, where is it? You were right. Just think about more blood returns. So the right atrium and the right ventricle will stretch more. And since no blood is lost in the heart or on the way to the lungs, more blood will be ejected into the pulmonary circuit. More will come back to the left atrium. The left ventricle will stretch more. And that will lead to an increase in the contractile strength This is called, and it's just think of a balloon being blown up more, and then the recoil will be bigger. So that's the Starling effect. And because you have more blood in the left ventricle, the stroke volume will be increased. So all of the above are true. We already talked about how the circulatory system is involved in thermoregulation, and you can see that on this figure. We talked in chapter 40 about vasoconstriction. When it's cold, then the capillaries near the epithelial surface, the skin, are contracted. They go a little bit deeper into the skin so that they don't lose as much heat. And that usually makes people look a little bit bluish, as opposed to vasodilation. When the body overheats, it can get rid of excess heat by dilating the blood vessels under the epidermis and increase the heat loss. So that is here the heat exchange. Heat distribution, we talked about the heat being produced mostly in the working muscles and then being distributed by the blood to all the parts of the body. In blood, heat is also stored. And we talked about the endocrine system. So there are several hormones that affect temperature regulation. And that is another way that the circulatory system is involved in thermoregulation. Consider this question. Why do capillaries have a small diameter? If you said B, you're correct, to facilitate the exchange of gas and materials across the endothelium. Gas exchange would be better facilitated if blood moves slowly or faster. You said slowly. Good job. Of course, because that exchange takes time. If you constrict the diameter of a tube, the velocity, the speed of the liquid in the tube, should it speed up or slow down? Look at that figure here. If you have a garden, you might have done this, that you actually increase the speed of the water coming out by putting your thumb and narrowing the diameter. So the correct answer here, it should speed it up. So that seems like a contradiction. We have a smaller diameter in capillaries, which should make it faster, but what we need and what happens is it slows it down. So how can we explain that? So here is just a visual that shows you how the diameter gets smaller and smaller. And it also shows that it's not just becoming smaller, like when you put your thumb on a watering hose, but that it actually branches into many, many different capillaries. And that's the answer to this question. If you look at this figure here, you see that we are going from low to high overall area. And here we then compare the total cross-sectional area. You see that in the large arteries, the total cross-sectional area is actually not so big. It's very low because we have very few of these large areas. And as we go to the capillaries, arterioles and capillaries, the total areas increases dramatically. At the same time, the velocity decreases, and that is going exactly counter the total cross-sectional area. So even though in an individual capillary the diameter is narrower than in an artery, we have to add all these cross-sections together and we get a decrease of the blood, because it's not just going from large to small, but from large to many small. And you can see also here in blue what happens to the mean blood pressure. It is higher in the large arteries. Here's our heart. It's high here. And as the peripheral resistance becomes more and more, because we just have narrower and narrower tubes, but we have more of them, the blood pressure overall goes down.